Hello, everybody. So, welcome you all to this roundtable on green policies. We have with us Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri, Honorary Fellow of TERI, who is also India's former ambassador to EU, and the Consuls General of Australia and Italy at the Bengal Chamber here. Our Additional Chief Secretary, Power of Government of West Bengal is joining us online. So as we start the session, we would just take a couple of minutes to see how corporates are making a difference. May we have a video of one of our partnering corporates?
In the air, Srishan takes it! India win!
The word first is ingrained into our DNA. The first organized steel service center in India for industrial customers. The first steel service center capable of processing high tensile steel up to 1100 megapascal, revolutionizing the industry through futuristic innovations. Equipped with cutting-edge technology to deliver innovative products and services to customers. In perfect harmony with Tata Steel, that enables it to extend its reach, facilitate order customization, optimize lot sizes, and execute just-in-time deliveries. Partnering with blue-chip national and international brands through a nationwide footprint and a vibrant, motivated, and agile workforce. In tune with current market dynamics, yet future ready. 100% subsidiary of Tata Steel, we are Tata Steel Downstream Products Limited.
Thank you. With this, I would request Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri to please take the session forward.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And Angana, normally they say thank you for giving me the floor, but I believe that the current nomenclature is thank you for giving me the screen. So thank you in any case. I want to start by expressing a very big thank you to the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Of course, many of you know that it is not just one of our oldest establishments dealing with commerce and business, but also one of the ones most active in the area of the environment. And I particularly want to say thank you to my good friend, classmate, but currently the president of the chamber, Mr. Dev Mukherjee. Thank you for inviting me. Happy to see your vice president and other senior members even with us. Ladies and gentlemen, a little bit about myself. I served for 38 years with the Indian Foreign Service, anchoring a lot of multilateral stuff, but in particular being one of the lead negotiators for India at the climate change negotiations. I will say a little bit about that and what these negotiations are about, especially since today, once again, and particularly after the change of the administration in Washington, D.C., they are once again the international flavor. But I had more than 10 to 15 years of dealing with these subjects, having represented India at numerous conferences of climate change, sustainable development, and having represented India at the United Nations. I have thereafter served as India's ambassador to the European Union and retired a year and a half back as India's ambassador to Nepal. A bit of a change, but again in the same kind of ecosystem and the same kind of requirements of sustainability and vulnerabilities that we all in the entire region of South Asia face from climate change. I want to say that I'm very delighted that today in our panel we have two absolutely important and perhaps representatives of countries which mean a lot to the global sustainable development agenda as well as the climate agenda. To my right, we have the Consul General of Italy. Italy, as many of you would know, is a member of the G7, perhaps the most important set of countries which really in various ways can do something and for whom the expectation of the world is that they will always do and lead. Italy is also chairing the G20, and that makes it particularly important, especially for countries like India and other large players in the developing world, because this is the one forum which brings together large developing and developed countries and allows for global action on matters of the global economy. And I must say that whichever way we look at it, climate change, or even if we look at the COVID-19 pandemic which is facing us, at the end of the day, the impacts are economic, and that is the great affectation on society. So, Mr. Consul General, a great welcome to you. And I want to say that all of us very much look forward to hearing not just Italy's perspectives, that too is important, but perspectives that Italy brings as the chair of the G20, as a member of the G7, and then let me say, as a very important member of the European Union with its leading climate activism, and there's so many things that we hear of and so on. In my understanding, for all of you who are here and who are part of this webinar, coming from the area of business, I would like to leave with you the thought, both for him as well as the Consul General of Australia, who I'll just introduce in a minute, are the possibilities of what these countries actually bring. They bring this to the global agenda, but they bring this particularly to the agenda of countries and societies and economies wishing to pursue a sustainable agenda. They bring technological hue. They bring a hell of a lot of actual experience. They bring abilities to be able to do things. And I dare say they bring partnerships. And I think that is something that each and every one of you listening to them today should take the opportunity of then reaching out. And I'm sure they too will reach out, because at the end of the day, for a country like India with its very ambitious green goals, very ambitious goals on sustainable development, they do require partnerships and they require collaborations. And these are two of the more important partners that we have, and we are therefore very happy to welcome them here. Madam Consul General, let me also say that Australia and India, of course, we just saw this thing bound together in cricket. And, you know, nothing could be ahead of that. Somebody mentioned in that particular advert that we only hear the word first. That's the only word that both of us always hear. So, you know, cricketing ties, no doubt about that at all. The home of Sourav Ganguly, that's where we are. BCCI's president and all of that. But, you know, yours is a country which, because of your location, because of the nature that you are also entwined with this Anglo-Saxon world in which we in India are also familiar as a result of our histories, you bring to bear so many elements that we can work together commonly and which become of interest and ease of doing business for our businessmen. And finally, I will say that this is the area where perhaps both India and Australia will have to grapple, no matter what our governments may be saying at a particular time, but in the real sense of the word, which is what do we do with perhaps currently the most, let me say, finger-pointed fossil fuel, which is coal. And I think this is where you and your country become particularly important for a country like India. In the course of my career, I used to serve on the board of a thing called the Clean Development, not the CDM. This is a board set up between major economies which actually focused on clean technologies. And let me say, the two countries which were most focused on what to do with coal, because there's no escaping from coal, were India and Australia. And of course, let me remind you that the United States is perhaps the biggest player with coal. I think most people forget that today more than 60% of electricity generated in the United States is generated from fossil fuel plants, and they aren't going away no matter what you hear. Now, my intention is not to talk about, what the others are not doing, etc. My intention here is to leave with you one very specific thought. Irrespective of what you hear that's happening in the global negotiation, the stance that we may take as India as a country, remember, all of that is about a different aspect. The aspect is really what is called global burden sharing. But in terms of green action, and action that is truly green, whether it's renewables, whether it's solar energy, and I'm so happy that you have Dr. Ajay Mathur speaking to you here, whether it's pollution drives, any of these particular things, I have no doubt in my mind that one of the countries that will set some of the highest goals for itself domestically on all aspects that have something to do with greening, sustainability will be India. And so therefore, it is my considered belief that for Indian business, these are an opportunity. And if you can ride ahead of the curve, you would have the advantages. These are the people with whom collaborations are possible. Remember, we are the country which is in a position to provide a market. Technologies get incubated in different places. The leading developed countries of the world, the United States in particular, but other members of the G7 and Australia too, each of them are great hubs of incubation of technology. Let me give you an example from today's world. We are all talking about vaccines for COVID. When it all began, there were 2 vaccines which came to the fore right in the beginning. You'll be surprised, but actually both of them were incubated in Europe. One was this vaccine which we all talk about today, Pfizer, a new kind of vaccine. Actually, a Turkish couple settled in Germany which incubated it, Pfizer bought it. That's the business story. And then you have what we in India call Covishield, but AstraZeneca, again from Europe. But would AstraZeneca become that great, a huge big demand, equivalent to what Pfizer is doing, for example, with its huge capacities in the United States, if they hadn't been having a massive manufacturing plant sitting in India? And that's where, the abilities to be able to dovetail, our abilities to produce scale, and also to provide a market. Because at the end of the day, if you manufacture hugely and everything is going outside, most businesses would think twice whether you should invest or not. There has to be some fallback elements of domestic market. Whatever way Mr. Poonawalla done is their way of doing it. But the idea itself remains particularly important. And I leave this particular thought with you. When we look at Italy, do you recall all the good works? Forget the issue of food, etc., which really, capture the heart. But look at industrial design. Look at the designs for automobiles. The future mobility is going to continue to remain centered around automobiles of some kind. Without fossil fuels, will they be electrified? Yes. But can design play a role in making them better, more efficient? I have absolutely no doubt. And this is the country, perhaps the only country in the world. In fact, most of the manufacturers that we do in India, if they're not designed elsewhere, they're invariably designed somewhere in and around Milan. This is the kind of technological progress. I mentioned to you Australia. I'll come back to the issue of coal. We are in an area where coal is particularly important. We can look here and there, but Bengal and the larger area, which at least this chamber used to cover once upon a time, and I'm sure all of you are involved in, the dependency, or rather, let me say, the criticality of coal for the economy remains particularly central. And we can keep saying we should shut down the coal plants. Frankly, the situation is that today, while solar power has become as inexpensive as thermal power during the daylight hours, for times when the sun is not shining or the wind is not blowing as far as wind power, there are a number of issues, but more than anything else, the critical issue is that balancing power cannot come from the solar as is currently known. We need to do far more than just PV cells and solar panels and so on. We need to do far more in terms of technology. I don't know where that technology will be developed, but we certainly have to be a country which needs to be wanting that technology. And hence the impetus that we can give to research and development, in my opinion, is particularly important. There are several other areas. So when we look at coal, I'll give you this one little example. You know, the Germans they removed nuclear power after Fukushima, a political decision. And then they said, we will focus hugely on solar and wind in a very big way. And they did it. And they have some enormous success with that. They haven't been able to shut down their thermal power plants. And in fact, much as we may talk about it, despite all of this, the technological abilities remain, that there is this particular balancing issue which thermal power continues to provide. The answers, however, are in the long run, or let me say even in the next few years as we develop other fuels, principally we're looking at hydrogen or we're looking at other elements, we would be able to get rid of this largest sea in the world, which is coal and carbon. But till then, can we do something about it? Carbon capture and storage, one set of ideas. Reusing carbon dioxide, another set of ideas. I don't know where they're going, not much. But in terms of cleaner coal and far better utilization of that, can we do it? If there are countries which have technologies, perhaps Australia is one of them. So I again, strongly underline the fact of why we have the Consul General of Australia with us. I will speak now. I'll speak again after our two interlocutors have introduced themselves, their ideas and the plans that they bring. But Mr. Consul General, I want to tell you, I arrived in Calcutta yesterday and I was delighted to see this article, co-authored by you and your British colleague, which says, COP26 will be a moment for the world to seize. I can't agree with you more. You're absolutely right, but I think just turn around. The next article, and I think because you are the Consul General, it had to be on the top front, is the one by a dear friend of mine from Bangladesh, Salimul Haq, and his colleague on the importance of adaptation. Why did I show these to you? Both sides are right. Are they complementary? Yes, they are. But the way they appear is as if they are juxtaposed. We would have to do something in terms of the international negotiation, in terms of the burden sharing, which is inherent in what is being negotiated, that we try and come to a solution which makes it a win-win situation. Yes, thank you very much. I haven't mentioned, but I'm very delighted to see the Additional Chief Secretary has joined us virtually. Mr. Suresh Kumar, welcome to this panel. I fully understand that, as a serving officer, there are competing requests for your time, and more than anything else, you are wielding executive authority. And so we're particularly delighted to see you. I want to leave a thought. So, one of the things that I mentioned to you, I think if they are applicable to the business members of this particular chamber, they are equally applicable to the governments. And you, in a sense, represent that. And coming from the power sector, I think it's particularly important that, you are part of this particular process of taking this forward. I look forward to hearing from you. Over the years, almost every state in India has set up state action plans to deal with climate change. It's become a national mission. The other day, the Prime Minister mentioned not only major national missions from the ramparts of the Red Fort, including a national hydrogen mission and 100% electrification of the Indian railways, but in a later speech mentioned that we need to try and take climate change to resonate with the people of India as a kind of dharma, and therefore try and take this forward. I think it would be willy-nilly impossible if the states in India, especially the major states like West Bengal, were not major players, and I'm sure you are. I also want to leave with you the thought that not only your state, but this great city where we are, Kolkata, needs to itself be in the forefront. As you pursue more development potential and doing other things, please try and see if you can build in a certain element of greening in it. There may be certain costs, but there are long-run benefits which flow from it. And so this particular element is particularly important, and I hope that we shall try and see something for it. Mr. Kumar, I believe that you may have to leave us and you have another engagement. So I would start the panel by asking you to sort of set the agenda for this particular discussion of ours, because in a sense, you set that particular domestic agenda, which is of course Indian, but local, and that is also particularly important as we pursue this greatest global challenge of our time, which is climate change. The screen is yours, Mr. Kumar. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairperson, the distinguished panelists, and members from the Bengal Chamber of Commerce. I hope I'm audible. Okay. The issue actually, I think, is related to more of decarbonization, which is a global trend, and every nation is definitely picking up wherever possible, because they have understood that the energy transition is happening. Energy transition, which was previously based on fossil fuels, is undergoing a change, and we're now getting into more and more into the renewables all over the world. West Bengal, fortunately, has always been very beneficial in the sense that we have had a number of coal mines, and we had a number of pithead power stations too, and we didn't have to transport coal more than maybe around 20 to 30 kilometers away. So I had this advantage of having the best of the natural resources available close to our power stations. But then even we are, in fact, are going through a transition now. We understand that it's not feasible to run more and more thermal power stations. The gestation time of a thermal power station is around 2 to 5 years. In 2 years flat, I can put up a solar power plant of the same capacity, and the cost of a unit would be half or even less than that. Everyone understands that the base load will definitely have to come from the thermal power station. So whatever existing thermal power stations are, we will try to run them as economically as possible. But we have to rely more and more on generating power from the renewables so that we can reduce the cost on the consumer. And, the consumer is now becoming the most important player in the whole agenda. Previously, the way tariffs have been fixed is that consumer is consulted notionally. I mean, he has absolutely no role to play in the overall tariff determination also. But now consumers have become much more alert. They're demanding that the cost of power should come down much more. And renewables definitely have a major role to play in this scheme of things. And all over the country, in fact, the Honorable Prime Minister has also brought in this one sun, one grid, one world. This concept also has come in. And during the last Paris Accord also, we're committed to putting in around 450 gigawatt of renewables by year 2030. We have already reached around 150 gigawatts of power. And I am 100% sure that over a period of time, we would be able to generate more and more power through renewables. The belief that the coal sector, which generates a fairly large amount of jobs, will not be able to transition to the renewable sector is also not, is completely unfounded, I would put it. Renewables generate far more, I would put it, jobs than even the existing coal sector. That's something which evidence is coming out gradually, and surely the politicians would also understand that renewables is the area to go by. With this, I think I would hand the floor back to the chairperson to make his comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kumar, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Thank you very, very much for what you said. And I think it's particularly important that you drew attention to all those who are participating in this seminar on both aspects. The importance of the thermal power situation as is currently and as it will develop, as well as the need to move towards renewable. And I am particularly happy that you highlighted and underscored the fact which affects everyone, which is the question of employment and jobs. And that what we are really talking about is a kind of transition, but a transition which can be dovetailed with development and with employment. So I think that is particularly good. I'm sure it is great news also for all the industrialists and businessmen who are attending this particular thing, because if the government remains focused on that, there would be targets there would be measurable goals, and there would be state policies which would allow them to plan what they wish to do and take things forward. I think this is particularly good. Thank you very much for being with us here and for making it quite clear in terms of what are the plans and which is the way forward in terms of the government and its thinking. I again leave with you the thought that the city too is important. You started by mentioning something about decarbonization, and I have absolutely no doubt, but I also want to leave with you another thought, that sustainability comes also as a result of several other actions beyond just decarbonization. In terms of the way we live life, we like to use the expressions of lifestyle changes, in terms of sustainability. Each of these things, especially as we urbanize a lot more and all cities become larger, India needs to put that in its own sense in terms of top gear. And I'm sure that's also something of great priority with the government here. So thank you very much. Mr. Consul General Italy, may I please request you to take the screen? Let me hand over the microphone to you, sir.
Sir, only name? Yes, Suresh Kumar. Huh? Yes, Suresh Kumar hai to. Okay, thank you. Carry on.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you to the organization for inviting me, to the speakers, the colleagues, and those who are taking part in this seminar/webinar. In my brief intervention, I will try to focus on the multilateral dimension of how it is possible to establish a green agenda. Why? Because the phenomenon of climate change has challenged both the legal and the policy instruments which had been deployed by governments in setting their own agendas in the environmental field. Together with migration, terrorism, and now also pandemics, climate change is a clear example of a really global challenge, which needs a new set of instruments, starting from the legal frameworks we want to give. A green agenda, until a few decades ago, would have been based on a more bilateral sort of nature. Why? For a series of reasons. First of all, multilateralism was not so well established, especially in the field of the environment. And secondly, because the normal case scenario would be that of a transboundary sort of dispute. If we think of the trail smelter dispute, it was a case involving Canada and the US, in which you had State A producing pollution on its territory, and then this pollution moving to State B, which was, of course, next door. This was in 1941, and it helped establish in international jurisprudence the principle of no harm, and that means that it was a first step towards the global, how can I say, recognition of the idea that you cannot harm other countries from the point of view of the environment. But that would be an easy case, because it was easy to identify the source of pollution, the first state, the consequence, because you would see the consequence in the second state, the cause link between the act of pollution and the damages, and the direct consequences of the damage caused. With climate change, of course, this is a totally different game. Why? Because with climate change, industrial plants, they emit pollution, let's say in China or in any other country that you want. And then what happens? As a result of these GHG emissions, the ice melts in the poles, the sea level increases in the Mediterranean, the desert areas become bigger in Africa, and so on and so forth. So compared to the simple case that we have mentioned before, differences are striking, because in the case of this global phenomenon, the source of pollution can be anywhere in the world, and the consequences can be anywhere else in the world. Therefore, the responsibility is common, is shared. And this is exactly the starting point for a multilateral agenda. Why? Because we have to recognize this idea of common and shared responsibility. Of course, the inherent forum to address this kind of concept is COP26, which will take place in Glasgow at the end of the year, and you may have read the article that the ambassador was referring to. But it is equally important to come to a sort of big gathering where all the states are included, at least with some common ideas. Therefore, I think it's essential to create smaller fora in which people can start creating a consensus. And I'm thinking particularly of the G20. Why the G20? Not just because, as the ambassador mentioned, Italy is chairing the presidency of G20 in 2021, but for the first time, it was decided this year, it happened in July, last month in Naples, to have a G20 energy climate ministerial. Why is this step relevant? First of all, because the G20, as you know, is an international forum that brings together the world's major economies. Its members account for more than 80% of the world GDP, 70% of global trade, and 60% of the population. So the starting point is, since there are all those global implications that we have seen, can anything be done in the world without an active involvement of this particular group of countries? Clearly, the answer is not. Second point for which it's important, it's the emphasis that has been put in the final declaration of the link between climate and energy, which was recognized, I think, for the first time on such a strong, in such a strong manner, and it defines a clear objective. Let me quote. The objective is accelerating the clean energy transition to tackle climate change in order to build a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, secure, and sustainable society that leaves no one behind. Of course, I challenge anybody to disagree with this big objective in terms of policy. And of course, the G20 is not the only group of shareholders, because as we said, in this particular field of climate change, every country may be called to suffer the consequences of the behaviors of other countries. But it is crucial to have at least a common view, because if no action comes from the group of the richest and most industrialized countries, those that command the latest and the best available technology, then I don't think we can expect too much of headway. In order to have effective policies for a global green agenda, I'm therefore convinced that we have to welcome this progress that was achieved in the G20 and hope that the COP26 in Glasgow will be able to find a bigger consensus on the actions and the practical steps to be taken in the coming years. Because this, as we said, is a global challenge, and therefore everybody must be on board. Thank you.
Mr. Consul General, thank you very, very much. I think it's particularly good that you have drawn the attention of the webinar to what is happening at the global level. We are talking about perhaps the greatest global issue. Many of the other issues which are mentioned are certainly plaguing the world, but action domestically has results domestically also. This is the one thing where domestic action has global reaction, and hopefully global action may help domestically. It's a very peculiar element of what is happening. But Mr. Consul General, you were also very right in saying that if the richest and most capable take action, then they demonstrate action. and lots of people look to that. This perhaps is not the place for us to get into the politics of this, but I just want to leave one thought. Irrespective of how and what are negotiating positions at the COP as well as the UN, India will be without any doubt one of the economies in the world with the largest amount of climate action. I think one of the things that we need to do is to also re-nomenclature many of our actions that we do, because the world is using a certain sense of phraseologies, and some of these things need to be factored in. But without any doubt in my mind, we shall be the place. We actually are seeking much stronger collaborations in terms of R&D, in terms of lots of things. The global burden sharing is a slightly different problem, and we'll talk about that in a little while. Madam Consul General, may I please give the screen to you, as they say.
Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues and members of the industry, and everybody joining us virtually as well. I'm delighted to be participating today in the Bengal Chamber of Commerce Ministry's 14th Environment and Energy Conclave. Thank you. And I think it is a given that this issue is Australia's and, of course, really the world's, thank you, most pressing issue. That is, as we move forward toward COP26, our green initiatives and the roadmap that we are following to achieve our united goals. As a country, Australia is very conscious of the need to take practical action to reduce emissions, to protect our unique biodiversity, and to care for our oceans and ecosystems, and the importance of adopting renewable energy sources to fuel our growth. Australia and India alike have a commitment to reducing emissions through the wide adoption of technologies. Australia's focus is on developing these solutions while partnering with other countries to decarbonise and ensure our economies can grow. So in the next few minutes, I'd like to address just a few of the key strands of Australia's approach, starting with reducing emissions through hydrogen and renewables, discussing also oceans and blue carbon, and finally, looking at our cooperation with India. So, low emissions. Australia's approach is to invest in new and emerging technologies to reduce emissions and support a sustainable economic recovery from COVID-19. So, we are transitioning to a low emissions future by promoting renewable energy and investing in future technologies. And we know that removing the green premium, that is the price difference, between current technologies and low emissions solutions, is the key to widespread global adoption. We need to bring down the cost of low emissions technologies so they're competitive with existing approaches. One such priority is clean hydrogen. I note that India shares this focus with your National Hydrogen Mission, and Australia's version is the National Hydrogen Strategy. And we are discussing opportunities to collaborate with India in this area. Australia's CSIRO, that's our peak scientific research organisation, has developed a national hydrogen roadmap to the development of a hydrogen industry in Australia. The CSIRO is currently completing a 2-year research project to develop a hydrogen production system that uses its vanadium membrane technology. And as I understand it, that means a vanadium membrane which allows hydrogen to pass through and stops other gases from passing through and makes the extraction of hydrogen from ammonia much easier. Our goal is to produce clean hydrogen for less than $2 a kilogram. And by the way, in case you're wondering who the CSIRO is, they're the folks that brought you Wi-Fi back in the 1970s, so they're pretty good with their research. And all of this is contained in Australia's technology investment roadmap, our plan to accelerate low emissions technology deployment. And the roadmap sets these stretch goals, such as attaining $2 per kilogram for hydrogen, to accelerate the deployment of priority emissions technologies both in Australia and overseas. Another part of Australia's low emissions pathway is investing in renewable energy. For example, the country with the highest uptake in the world of rooftop solar is Australia. 1 in 4 houses in Australia has rooftop solar on it. Adding wind power, only my European colleague here is actually doing better and has more wind and solar capacity per person than we do, but in Europe they're still beating us. The Australian government is also backing renewables through the Snowy 2 project. This is the 2,000 megawatt pumped hydro storage project, and it's the largest renewable energy project in Australia, accelerating the decarbonisation of our national electricity market. The Snowy 2 project has almost $1.4 billion of equity investment by the Australian government, and it's addressing the increase in intermittent power sources in the electricity grid by providing energy storage. On oceans and blue carbon, I'd like to touch on these issues. As I'm sure you're all aware, blue carbon ecosystems form a major part of our environmental resilience. Not only can they sequester 2 to 4 times more carbon than terrestrial forests, they provide significant benefits for biodiversity, fisheries, economic livelihoods, and the resilience of coastal communities and coral reefs. And I'm sure nobody knows that better than all of us here living on the edge of the Sundarbans, one of the biggest and most important mangrove forests in the world. Australia also has a large area of blue carbon ecosystems, about 10% of the world's such ecosystems. We're pursuing greater recognition and protection of coastal blue carbon, for example, through the International Partnership for Blue Carbon. And this partnership was launched by Australia at the COP21 in Paris back in 2015. It brings together governments, NGOs and researchers to work in collaboration. Australian support will strengthen blue carbon expertise and data and encourage public and private sector investment and financing of blue carbon projects. In Australia, the government is supporting several projects related to blue carbon. For example, exploring restoration techniques for conserving coastal ecosystems, improving our understanding of the extensive seagrass meadows, which are habitat to dugongs and green turtles, assessing the Gulf of Carpentaria mangrove dieback, working with traditional owners and local citizens to better manage Great Barrier Reef estuarine wetlands, assessing the status of threatened and migratory marine species, underpinning the repair and conservation of Australia's threatened coastal marine habitats, seagrass mapping, research on how coastal vegetated habitats store carbon. With one of the largest maritime jurisdictions in the world, we are investing in building healthier oceans to combat climate change. Actually, over 3.3 million square kilometres, that's 37% of our nation's marine areas are protected, and scoping is underway to expand this further. So Australia has joined the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, and this coalition's central goal is to protect 30% of land and ocean by 2030. The 37% of protected areas, marine areas that Australia already has, shows that this is possible, it's achievable, at least the ocean component there. Counted together, Australia has more than 29% of its land and sea in protected areas already. But we recognise that globally, only 15% of land and only 7% of seas are currently in protected areas. So achieving protection of 30% across the world will require significant international effort, action that is critical to halting the loss of biodiversity and protecting ecosystems. And now to Australia-India cooperation. I'm not going to mention cricket. Of course, at the crux of the global energy transition is an understanding between nations. International collaboration is crucial to lowering the cost of low emissions technologies across global supply chains. We are collaborating with international partners and supporting our neighbours in the Pacific to tackle climate change. India and Australia are like-minded and have complementary interests as we both seek an energy transition while maintaining economic growth. The Australian government is committed to technology-driven energy transition, just like India. In the comprehensive strategic partnership between our two nations, our Prime Ministers committed to enhancing energy cooperation, and to hold annual energy dialogues which encompass discussion on energy storage systems, efficiencies, and the grid integration of renewables. As India looks to increase its renewable energy, aiming for an installed 175 gigawatts by next year, scaling up to 450 gigawatts by 2030, we are keen to support this transition, and congratulations on already achieving 100 kilowatts, by the way. As I mentioned previously, we're both working on hydrogen as a low emissions technology, creating ample scope for collaboration between our two nations. And Australia is proud to be a founding member of the International Solar Alliance and appreciates India's global leadership of this important issue to enhance energy security and sustainable development. There is also positive momentum in Australia and India's collaboration on critical minerals. These are key to many of the energy technologies on which our transition to lower emissions will rely. Australia has major deposits of key battery minerals, including lithium and cobalt. Austrade has commissioned a report identifying how Australia and India can, together, unlock the potential offering of Australia's critical minerals to meet India's demand, using Australia's minerals as inputs for Make in India renewable energy technologies. Lastly, globally and more prominently across the Asia-Pacific, water security is declining due to rising population growth, prosperity, the industrialisation of agriculture, and of course to climate change. Our High Commissioner joined with Joint Secretary Yadav to launch the Australia-India Water Dialogue, bringing our water experts together to the table. And of course, last year, our Foreign Minister launched the Australia-India Water Security Initiative, which is enhancing India's urban water security. So together, we're building more water-resilient cities and healthier cities. So Australia and India are like-minded in our approaches. We're both committed to a technology-driven approach to reduce emissions, and our governments are investing heavily to achieve energy targets. Like India, Australia is on track to exceed our 2030 Paris goals. Over the last 2 years, our 2030 position has improved by 639 million tonnes, and that's the equivalent of taking all the cars off Australian roads for 15 years. Sustaining the pace of our coordinated efforts and building on international partnerships as the foundation of global energy transition is the key to a low emissions, resilient and renewable energy-driven economic growth. Technological developments that support energy affordability, improve energy systems reliability, and contribute to long-term emissions reductions will be vital as global energy markets continue to evolve. And that is something which I believe India and Australia are doing and can expand upon together. Thank you.
Madam Consul General, thank you very much. And I think you have certainly had a large number of people who are in our vast audience network quite excited, because even before you had closed, I had a question popped in on my screen, and I'm not going to therefore let you off the hook. And this is an interesting question. Perhaps it should have been fielded to our colleague from Italy, but it's coming to you. It's from Sushmita Das from El Sameh. The question is, how are the environment protection policies different in developing countries like India? And of course, she used the expression from the West, but I mean, from the developed world. And then she asked something about inclusions of sustainably developed procedures and mechanisms in various realms of work. But I think she's gone to the bottom of it. His Excellency, the Consul General mentioned shared responsibilities. The word is differentiated. But let me hear from you what you have to say on what she says, how the environment policies in the developed and the developing world need to be different. How they need to be different. Well, are different and need to be different. Let's hear from you.
I'm not sure that they are that different in terms of their goals. How they need to be different, I think it's the responsibility of the more developed nations to provide, particularly when we're looking at a technological approach, to provide that research to move forward, and of course those that have the capacity and the funds to pour more into research and technologies and can do so, are able to do so and can do so. And I believe there is a responsibility there. But I think the underlying point of that question misconstrues the idea that we're all in this together. This is a global issue. So pointing to the differences is perhaps not what we're trying to do at the moment. It's pointing to where we can work together, where we can complement each other, and where we can find solutions that will actually bring everybody forward, which is what technological solutions will do.
Madam Consul General, I can't agree with you more because the word is common. And I think you've said it very well. You know, before we say anything else, and there are very good people on the webinar who are taking interest in action. Is there anyone around this table who'd like to say something or add something or has anything to ask from the two Consuls General? I think you understood everything that they were trying to say. Let me say this to you. These are countries which in their own and in terms of their global collaboration are good role models and have produced things which are useful. But let me take you, we have about 10-15 minutes to talk about, what's happening in the world. First of all, as I mentioned, it is my convinced belief that India will be the place for a great deal of green action. And by green action, I not only mean renewable energy, where of course we have suo moto taken target, which many people, including many of you sitting here, would say is fairly ambitious, difficult to do, 450 gigawatts by 2030, considering we are just above 150 or so at the moment. And it's a tough call. But we are determined, and we've taken this particular thing all by ourselves. On electric vehicles, again, we were kind of late starters, but we've taken the target that about 30% of all new vehicles in the next 10 years will all be electric driven. Herein obviously lies an opportunity. I'm sure many of you here are looking at issues of how electric mobility will be taken around, whether it's simple things such as charging stations, whether it's the entire issue of batteries. After all, why was mobility, why did it not 100 years back become electric and instead became internal combustion engine? Because we know this is exactly what happened in the United States. The oil companies rolled out petrol pumps and the Edison Electric said it's too difficult or whatever. That's the way history is. I want to leave with you all many thoughts of ideas that we have crystallized in some of our webinars and so on technologies which we think would be of great relevance to India. And so if you can look at partners, you can look at others with whom you can work. For some of you, these might be areas of opportunity. One, and you will have Ajay Mathur speaking to you right now, is solar energy. The Consul General just mentioned to you, and the other Consul General also was pointed out to the fact that there's wind and solar. They are our two primary kind of focus. Now within solar, a great deal of effort is taking place on these PVs, the solar PV. And obviously so, it's the cheapest, it's the best thing. Some of these things may be rolled back to some extent. I don't know how the China trade, etc. will go on. But do remember that there are going to be several other issues which may come about with all of this in about 20 years' time, including disposal of this waste. What are we going to do about rare earths? Again, a good points were made, but these are issues. I would leave with you one of the thoughts. Today, solar panels, for all their ease of use of installation, etc., are cumbersome. If we could look in terms of flexible solar panels, there are some little laboratory scale answers that people are talking about. If I leave the thoughts with all of you who are in a solar rich country, if you look at some ideas, these could be ideas which we can look at for collaboration and taking things forward. There are several other areas, the entire business of the development of hydrogen technology. Where is it going to go? How is it going to go? But let me take you to COP26, because that's where we started off and that's the headline topic. 5 major areas have been identified for global cooperation. And these areas are adaptation, and rightly so, because climate change, which is going to be fueled and which is being fueled by the carbon emissions that have already taken place. Climate change is one of those sort of things. It's not only that what we emit in India affects the United States and what they do affects us. but what they emitted 100 years back is continuing to affect us. It is a peculiarity as a result of the stock of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and not so much the current emissions. Current emissions contribute to stock. So, the technology and the understanding of this is such that these responsibilities do have a thing to do with what has happened. The fact that, don't do it much more today is of course relevant, but the fact of what has happened is one that cannot not be defining the way responsibilities and people accept it. For developing countries, there should be no doubt that adaptation is going to be the critical element, because these are the products of things that have already happened. Now, whether we are looking in terms of sea level rises, we are looking in terms of what do we do with frequent weather events, etc. All of these are going to be issues which will need to be debated. The problem with adaptation, unlike mitigation, which is really cutting down greenhouse gases, is the difficulty in identifying quantitative goals, and hence for a global discussions become difficult. And these then all come down to the issue of money. Now on money, I'll say something, this is purely Manjeev Puri's own views and thinking. There's a great deal of talk that the world, the developed world, committed to $100 billion a year at Copenhagen, which is 2009, but that they've fallen short. Yes, there's no doubt. But it is my convinced belief that with the renewed interest in climate and the renewed imperative for doing something on climate, especially with the change in the US administration, the developed world is looking at ways and means by which this kind of figure could be realized. Now, it won't be a simple matter of cutting a check. It will be a complicated set of financial transactions involving multilateral institutions and involving the private sector, necessarily so. But in various ways, the availability of finance of this 100 billion will be there. I want to leave a thought for everyone in India. Is this really going to be the kind of thing that we are looking for? I think that time has passed. The time when the most concessional World Bank loans, IDA, etc. came to us, I think that time is past. I would say that all of you in this chamber and elsewhere should be prepared to look at what the market has to offer. So if the market becomes more ready to do greening and give you whatever special discounts, etc. on that, that's the kind of thing. And there I would leave a thought very strongly with everyone. The general understanding of a study on finance in India is that most of the projects that we prepare are difficult bankable internationally. And so this is an area of capacity building, but looking at very seriously. Internationally, it might just become very difficult to be able to raise money for coal power, for example. Might just be very difficult. There are similar kinds of things happening. But one of the very interesting things to note is that the Europeans, who have been in the forefront of developing how the capital markets can be structured, have been working on developing a taxonomy, which is a set of, systems or definitions of what qualifies. I think we in India need to buck up and join them, because we are not in it as of now. And they are perhaps the only ones who are going far ahead. The West sees in India a market also for finance. Let's understand that it's not just technology. So again, these are very important collaborators for us. And if we can try and take this thing forward, it would be particularly useful and good for us. Clean road transport, I've mentioned that, we are going to become large players in this particular thing. When we talk in terms of energy transition, I think the additional chief secretary was very clear on what the lay of the land currently is. Are we going to have any great revolutions? Well, we have to see. Will the national hydrogen mission result, not only in India, but global hydrogen missions, result in being able to remove the C word and replace it by the H word? I don't know the answer. But we need to try and see what we can do in terms of harnessing all of it. We need to use the best of technologies. Why not AI? Why not IT in its various ways? But each of these things is going to be critical, because let me say this, that the businesses will start getting judged, especially those which come up for, let me say domestic judgment, people's judgment. They will start getting judged also on criteria of greening. And we need to be part of these conversations. By we, I mean industry in India, government in India, all of us need to be part of these conversations, because global norms are getting developed. And this is particularly, I think, a very opportune time that you've convened this particular thing. I want to say that I don't know how much time, Angana, do we have? Do we still have some time, or we need to wind up? 5 minutes. So if there are any more questions anywhere else, we'd be happy to take them. But India has a number of strengths. One of the things that we talk about are nature-based solutions. But again, we need to try and sharpen this particular edge and see what we can do. You heard the additional Chief Secretary mention about decarbonization. I mean, there should be no doubt that the concepts of mitigation have a great deal to do with decarbonization. But you know, if we try and define the thing a little broader in terms of sustainability, the UN adopted Sustainable Development Goals with an end date of 2030. In all probability, a little bit of slippage, courtesy COVID, etc., would have to be accepted. But if we look at sustainable development, then can we find ways of using even the carbon that we are using in a more intelligent manner? Can we get more out of that carbon? So I'm not talking about, you know, stop carbon. Can we be better in it? Can we do more of, let's say, recycling? And there are so many aspects. Education, hunger, each and every one of them costs. Look at this. You know, COVID-19, the 1 year plus of lockdown, perhaps was the one time when the current emissions worldwide went down. But you know, in terms of its impact, in terms of global climate change, it's minimal. It has to be minimal because no matter how much you do today, its impact in terms of the global stock will only be that much. Which is why you look at the latest IPCC report, it stresses the need to do much more. And when we say much more, I mean, there is little doubt that the Europeans have been working very hard, have done well, have done a tremendous amount. I'll give you one set of statistics just to underline this point that you hear a lot from India about transition, justice, equity, etc. So let me take one set of figures. They are spoken about a number of times. They are important to understand, internalize. Globally, the per capita emissions of carbon dioxide have been coming down. And they have, you know, there's China on one side and increase, India, all our developing countries. But among the developed countries, they've been coming down. What have we seen as to the current state of play? The Europeans as a whole are roughly in the region of about 5 to 6 tons. The Chinese are above them. They are today in the region of 8 to 9 tons, whichever way you look at it. The United States, on the other hand, is 16 tons. And frankly speaking, it's an economy which is as big as Europe. At $21 trillion, the European Union at 18 trillion and Britain at about 3, it amounts to roughly about the same amount. Action at that end, I don't know what's going to happen. Global commitment is tremendous. There is no doubt that President Biden, Mr. Kerry and others are globally committed. How much of domestic action would happen? And why, in my opinion, is domestic action in the United States important? It's of course there for their own footprint to come down. But it's important because they have the leading ability in catalyzing what you said, madam, technological transformation, as well as making money available. When it becomes a case where they are hugely invested in it for their own reasons, believe me, at least I don't think that much of the developing world, but particularly India, will stand behind. India is a country where once the technologies becomes known and is acceptable anywhere in the world, we are very happy to bring it. There's a sense of comfort, there's a sense of doing it. We can see it with mobile telephony. If we become the largest market in the world, we're soon becoming one of the largest places in the world for e-commerce. How is it happening? Because we are seeing that this technology, this methodology was used in countries where the systems are such that we are comfortable with and that they work. We become big users. We will become big users. But these technological shifts really need to come from that. I've made this point to you so that, you know, there is a clear understanding that India will be on the path of wanting to do much more. This global burden sharing business is a different thing. It is a kind of negotiation because there is a global burden sharing issue which revolves around all of this particular thing. The other point I would like to make to everyone here, including our two colleagues there, is that it is true that as developing countries, the larger group, the group of 77, which is actually 132 countries, we and China sit together. We are also together and collaborating on a number of these discussions in terms of what is called the basic group, Brazil, India, China, and South Africa, in terms of global negotiations on climate change. But let us be very clear of where India is and where China is. Among the G20, we are the only country in the world where per capita emissions are less than 2 tons per person. This is completely different from anyone else, including the developing country in the G20, let alone the developed world. We are a country where the development imperatives are tremendous. But can we do what the Chief Secretary was doing? Dovetail this with a degree of element of greenness. Both sides are equally important. One for the health of the planet, which would mean our health, and the other of what we do. So I leave this thought with all of you, that these decisions are complex. They are complex by the nature of the question that was asked. Do policies have to be different? They have to be somewhat different. They are common, but there has to be somewhat different depending on development imperatives, which by itself are perhaps the greatest global challenge in any case, all over the place. I want to thank the Chamber very much, Mr. President, to you, to Angana, my colleagues here. The Chief Secretary is not there, but in absentia. Thank you very much for this most wonderful and enlightening discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sirs and madam. With this, we are closing this session here. So our YouTube and LinkedIn would be continuing. So we are closing the Facebook. So we will start the Facebook relive again at 4:30 for the inaugural session of the 14th edition of the annual Environment and Energy Conclave. So Facebook is closed, right? So I would request the President of the Chamber to please present a token of our appreciation to Ambassador Puri.